Today we're going to be talking about how HR professionals might benefit from the use of artificial intelligence, or AI, and legal traps to avoid when they do that. Welcome to Off the Clock, the webcast of employment attorneys at Miller Johnson, where we discuss what is happening in the HR world and provide practical insight and advice. I have to say, as you know, I am learning new things.
I
am learning new things because
I did not know you were learning new things.
I am
but
learning
what are you
new
getting
things
at?
because, quite frankly, I don't consider myself to be a tech savvy person.
That
right?
I knew. Okay, I'm tracking you.
If something needs to be fixed on my phone or computer, I usually bring my kids over to try to figure that out for me, for example.
Same.
And so I'm not sure I've appreciated how the use of artificial intelligence has begun to really influence the HR world. And so it's been really fun to understand that and learn more about that. So I'm excited to talk about it today. And I know you are a little ahead of me on this one too.
Just a smidge. The only time I'll ever be ahead of you.
I don't know about that.
But yes, I've worked with it in other arenas and had some experience working with clients with some AI, artificial intelligence type of matters. And we'll get to where it really plays the biggest role with clients of all sizes at this point. But let's just break down the phrase artificial intelligence.
What is artificial intelligence?
I think you're more comfortable with it than you think.
Yeah,
you just don't know you're using it.
Yeah.
So artificial intelligence is anytime a machine is doing something, for trying to figure something out for us that really a person could do or used to do, but now a machine is doing it. So think about like when you dictate into your phone.
Right.
If you do that, I do that. And the words kind of jumble up a little bit sometimes, and then a second later, right, the phone figures out, what I'm trying to say, right, based on usage, et cetera, and then fixes it for me. So that's artificial intelligence.
Those automated processes that are based on some sort of assumptions, right, that a machine has, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Someone has to program it in, of course, at some point, right? Programs in the assumptions. And then the computer takes over and just runs super, super quick, obviously, much, much, much faster than humans can do, run through it and spit out the result. So AI is really everywhere.
It really is.
If you have a cell phone, you have AI and you're probably using it.
Right.
But in the HR world, where are we seeing it most? In your experience?
I think I know hiring, selection processes and hiring is where I am really getting a lot of questions and I'm seeing a lot of use of AI. Do you agree with that?
I agree, especially since applications, tend to be electronically submitted now. So it's super easy for a computer to scan for keywords, right? To either exclude certain people or include certain people, right? Based on certain experience levels, et cetera. So particularly for jobs with high application rates and very large companies, they're all using AI, right? To screen applications and such. So then the hiring people in HR, right, get 100 applications instead of 1,000. Okay. And everyone's happier. Right, that's the idea behind it. But larger organizations in particular have already started adopting AI in other types of HR functions.
Give some examples of those.
It's absolutely fascinating. Like they have chatbots for FMLA leave, right? And then it's not just, we're all familiar with the call line where you leave a voicemail, but this is an interactive process where someone is asking a computer, a robot, as I like to say, is asking for follow-up questions and engaging and that sort of thing. So,
and did you say chatbot?
Chatbots.
Okay.
Yeah, so chatbots, I know it's a short for robot. So it's actually a robot chatting with you. You know when you're on various internet sites and a little thing pops up and says,
Can I help you?
I'm Chad. How can I help you?
You mean that's not really Chad?
Breaking news. There is no one named Chad.
It's just
there
a
is
bot.
a robot that someone named Chad, probably after their son, whoever programmed it, right? And that is a quote-unquote chat bot, right? So we're seeing HR functions, again, mostly in very large organizations at this point, use AI, chatbots, et cetera, to do routine functions that they believe can be handled by
Interesting.
AI.
Okay.
But even smaller employers now, right, are using AI for screening job applications.
Yes.
You're absolutely right about that.
Okay.
I think that is the most prevalent place we're seeing it, and that is the issue that the EEOC has recently spoken
just
on,
issued a guidance
right?
on, which of course caught my eye, right? New guidance from the EEOC, right?
Yeah, it's a very exciting day.
And actually, it's the second guidance they've issued. The first one we're going to talk about in a bit, and that's about the ADA. And of course, I find that even more interesting. but we'll talk about the more recent one, in which the EEOC spoke a bit about how the use of artificial intelligence by HR, again, focused really on hiring and selection more than anything else.
Yeah.
Could be problematic under Title VII. And it was sort of a timeout for employers and a reminder that even when using AI, we do still have to comply with these laws, with these employment laws that exist, right? We don't get a pass because a bot did it, for example, right?
Or let's just do a PSA for a minute, or because a vendor did it.
Yeah.
Right? So for a lot of clients, particularly not the huge corporate client, they hire a vendor, right, to screen resumes, applications, etc. Right? And so how can I be responsible if I hired you to do it and you messed up, right? And what the EEOC said is nothing new to you and me, but it will be new to a lot of people
I agree.
listening and watching, and it goes well beyond the AI context. So let's just say it and let it sink in for folks, and then we'll move into the AI context.
Right.
When you hire someone, you meaning the company, when a company hires someone to do something for it, that other company can become an agent,
Right.
right,
Exactly.
of the first company, and the first company can be responsible,
From a legal
liable, as
standpoint,
lawyers would
right?
say, for mistakes that the agent makes.
Correct.
So everyone just let that sink in for just a moment.
Right.
So if I have my own company, I hire Sarah to do screening and interviewing and recommend certain candidates for, let's say, the final interview process. And Sarah is discriminating against certain applicants because of, pick a protected characteristic.
Sure.
And that comes to light, and the EEOC looks into it, or there's a lawsuit. Sarah obviously can be liable. So can I, my company.
That's right.
Okay. So then applied to AI, it means that it's not a get out of jail free card because you hired a vendor, right, to provide your AI.
And if the vendor is using AI in a way that has that discriminates, and we're going to unpack that in just a minute because that's really important.
Yes.
Then yes, we can be on the hook. So let's talk about that word discriminate for a minute, Rebecca, because I think it's unlikely that one of those third-party vendors would use artificial intelligence that intentionally discriminates, right? Like how could a computer program or a robot or other AI device intentionally discriminate against applicants based on a protected class?
I'm a little more, I guess my imagination is a little more active than yours. So I can imagine, a bad guy figuring out a way to do that, but I think it's highly unlikely.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
As we talked about this episode before we started recording, we realized we're going to talk about discrimination in a way that most of our listeners have never thought about. We both understand it and think about it, right? But most people watching and listening, our guesses, do not think about discrimination in this way.
Or not very often. They might, this phrase might be familiar to them, but they've not applied it very often. And with AI, they're going to be thinking about it a whole lot more.
So most people watching and listening are probably aware of discrimination as an intentional act, right? Intentional, disparate treatment, right? I am treating you differently. I'm evaluating you differently. I am making hiring decisions differently. with the intent, right, of discriminating against you because of whatever protected characteristic or activity it is, right? There's this whole other bucket out there of discrimination, which is called disparate impact.
Yep.
And for disparate impact, and this is the part that's going to get people, I think, intent is irrelevant.
So if we have a practice, or a decision-making process that has the result of discriminating against certain protected classes, even if we didn't mean to, okay, that can be unlawful under Title VII. For example, many of our listeners are familiar with the idea of how the use of criminal background checks,
That's a great example.
right,
Yeah.
has a disparate impact on genders and races, in particular men of color, okay? Because unfortunately in this country we see a disproportionate number of men of color who are convicted of crimes for all sorts of historical and societal reasons we're not going to talk about here, okay? And so that's an example of disparate impact, right? So when an employer relies on a criminal background check, it creates the potential that it could have a disparate impact on men of color, okay? Now, it's important to make one thing clear, and that is employers can use practices that have a disparate impact, but only if they are necessary for the job or the business and they are narrowly tailored.
Right.
Okay. So probably the most famous example of this, and you'll hate that I mention this, is the Hooters job requirement, right? But it's the classic example.
Classic Hooters.
Yes. Clearly their selection criteria discriminates on the basis of protected classes, gender for sure, age I'm guessing as well, potentially disability, right? All sorts of classes.
We had a Hooters weight case in Michigan, by the way.
Yes. Lawsuits have been brought against Hooters, and the question in those lawsuits becomes, is that necessary for Hooters business, and is it narrowly tailored to that purpose, right? Okay. So let's go back to what that means for artificial intelligence. And
I'm dying to hear how you tie Hooters to artificial intelligence.
Yes, right? So
Two complete ends of the spectrum.
yes.
Okay, let's see you do it.
The concern with regard to using artificial intelligence then to make these selection decisions for us is that, as we mentioned at the beginning, right, someone at the outset programs the criteria.
Yes. Even with AI, there are humans
Even with AI,
involved.
it began with some
conception.
amount of subjectivity.
Yes.
When you use AI in an automated way like that, it can perpetuate if the criteria at the beginning included bias, then the use of AI perpetuates that bias exponentially.
Let's break down that word bias for just a minute. Again, we're in the disparate impact world. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an intentional bias against or a negative, feeling about any particular group of people.
Sure.
It can be a criteria that a hiring manager or someone, said, I'd like people from this geographic region with this particular educational background, with this many years of experience, which would necessarily exclude younger people, for instance, right? You see, so it doesn't have to be bias as such a negative connotation to it. I know what you mean. I just want to make sure all of our listeners and watchers know what we mean.
That's exactly right.
So it can be, let's just take the years of experience because that's an easy one. Let's say a hiring manager says I need 25 years of experience, right? And that is entered, he doesn't mind younger workers just for this position, right? He's decided to do that largely because, let's say, and I'm sure no one's heard this before, we'll get way too many applications. So this is like an easy way to just, eliminate half the applications and get it down to a reasonable amount. That would have the impact, of excluding younger workers, even though, again, there's no negativity necessarily towards younger employees. right? And that would have a disparate impact on the younger workforce compared to the older workforce. Okay.
Right. Which again, doesn't create liability automatically.
Nope.
But then that business would have to say, well, we need 25 years of experience for this position because fill in the blank.
Yep.
And there's no other way to get to that place more narrowly than that, right? Okay.
Yep.
So again, let's take it back to AI and imagine an employer then using a vendor, right, to help sort applications, right? The vendor has created presumably criteria to help do that.
Yep.
Okay. And so from a very practical standpoint, what should that employer then be thinking about with this guidance and this idea of disparate impact to try to avoid any potential legal issues?
We have responsibility, whether we're doing it ourselves or hiring a vendor,
of course,
to validate whatever the selection process is. And you and I, we're just a bunch of employment lawyers, right?
Sure.
So we're not going to get into the math and the science and the statistical analysis, but it's out there, right? You can do it yourself. You can hire experts that do this, actually. They do validation studies. And just to boil it down into layman's terms, they compare, right, the application pool and what that looks like in terms of various protected characteristics. And the applicants you're actually getting, right, at the end of this AI process, and they compare it.
That's right. So as our listeners are getting emails from all of these vendors, right, saying, let us help you with your hiring needs, your selection, etc., right? The first thing I would be saying is pay attention to those vendors. And I'm just going to guess that some are better than others, right?
Good guess.
And you would want to be using a vendor that, number one, can demonstrate, can articulate how they've created their criteria and what they are relying on, and can show you what they are.
Yes.
Right? And so HR person can look at those and make sure they're comfortable with what the criteria are, and then also can demonstrate that they've spent the time and money to validate the criteria to make sure that use of that criteria is not having a disparate impact on a protected class.
That is, to me, that is the most important
That's
step.
exactly
Because we
right.
all have so many blind spots. We don't, I don't, you don't, none of us really know how different questions might impact, right? The pool you end up with, right, at the end of the process. So if they're good, they should have gone through the validation process and should be able to confirm that for you.
Yes, I would not use a vendor that can't demonstrate that their process, their platform, whatever it is, has been validated.
Correct. Should we move on to the ADA?
Let's move on to the ADA,
Okay.
because this is really, in my opinion, the more interesting and
well, it's more challenging.
The more
I think,
challenging
for employers
piece.
to work through, right? To get your head around and to work through how do we use AI in the hiring process and be compliant with the ADA.
So, and I'll just say this at the outset, as we all know, the ADA is unique because it includes this idea that we engage in an individualized assessment. Particularly when we are talking to applicants and employees about reasonable accommodations. Okay, the idea of of an individual assessment is completely contrary to the idea of using AI.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
The whole point of AI is that it's automated.
Right.
And that it's so that it saves time. But yet also, in this other hand, we have the ADA, which says, well, time out. If we have an employee with a medical impairment, we need to be having individual conversations with them. We need to be conducting individual assessments to figure out whether they can perform the essential functions of the job and whether there's an accommodation that might help them do that. So the question becomes, how do you combine those things?
Is it even possible? I mean, when I first started thinking about it, my first instinct was, well, it's just, I just don't see how it's possible, right? To use AI in the screening and hiring process and also be ADA compliant. But the EOC has talked about this, right?
And they seem to think that it is. I mean, first of all, let me be clear, the EEOC is not saying at all that when employers use AI, they don't have to worry about reasonable accommodations under the ADA. It's quite the opposite, right?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so reasonable, that
ADA
concept
applies.
doesn't go away.
That concept does not go away, but they have some practical advice about how employers might be thinking about this. Okay. And so I'll say this. There are two ways in which the ADA reasonable accommodation process might influence the use of AI, and let's just, again, make it applicable to hiring, because that seems to be what everyone's talking about right now. The first way is that an applicant may have a disability that impacts how AI affects them as an applicant. So some of the examples that the EEOC gives are some employers are using AI to test or screen employees, right? You have to take a typing test, or they're using it to conduct interviews.
Really?
And they look at speech patterns and eye contact, et cetera, to determine whether the person would be a good candidate or not, right? And you and I, and I'm sure most of our listeners now, our brains are spinning and thinking about different disabilities that might screen out those applicants.
Right.
Not because they wouldn't be qualified for the job, but because their disability disqualifies them effectively, because we're using AI.
The way AI was programmed, it would screen them out.
That's exactly
from the next
right.
step in the process.
That's exactly right. And then the other piece is that we may have applicants who equally could do the job with a disability but need an accommodation to do that, right? So what the EEOC really says about both of those things is that if we are going to be using AI in the hiring and selection process, we should be making very clear to the applicants what we're using, how it's being used, right? In the selection process, a chatbot is going to interview you and making decisions based on speech pattern and eye contact, for example. And then, I think you know what's coming next, and tell applicants, if you believe this may impact you because of a health condition or a physical or mental impairment, here is how you let us know that and potentially request an accommodation.
Yeah.
So we've got to insert into that process a timeout.
Yes.
To say, okay, if this is an applicant with a health impairment that could fall under the ADA, that's where we would insert that individual process into this automation.
Perfect.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's how you integrate then AI in hiring with the ADA. Do not miss that step.
Exactly.
Yeah, do not miss that step.
And then with regard to the individual's ability to actually then perform the job, not just take the test, but perform the job, they recommend a similar disclosure at the beginning of the process, right? Here are the essential functions that this job requires. If you believe you might need an accommodation to do those things, here's how you would request it so that we can have that individual assessment with you outside of these automated systems.
So there's no shortcuts. I think I said that on another episode too. Yes. But in the world of ADA and reasonable accommodations, there really are no shortcuts.
That's exactly right. So, and you know what that means for us and our listeners?
Rebecca? Job security?
Is that the human part of human resources cannot completely go away. Truly, right? In order to do the core functions of HR, and in order to comply with all of these various legal requirements, AI, we can leverage AI to make our jobs easier, perhaps, and streamline them. But I don't see a path in which we completely eliminate humans from human resources.
I agree, and that will make everyone feel much better.
That's exactly right. And
being
we have
replaced.
jobs, and of course,
You and I have jobs.
That means we
and
will continue to have
HR
jobs.
folks are not being replaced by robots
Exactly.
anytime soon. Excellent.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
thank
know this
you.
was new territory for you, and I bet probably most people listening, but I thought it was super informative.
And I have a feeling we'll be talking more about it in the future because this is one of those topics that's going to continue to evolve.
I think so. All right. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Rebecca.